Indonesia. And good evening to Professor John Meyer, who is in California, United States. Before we let me invite Reverend Ishak Latu. Pak Ishak.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, to pray for us all and for this webinar to be kicked off. So, time is yours, Pak Pendeta, to pray.
Okay. Good morning, panel in Indonesia. In the United States, we always call Professor Rupidara and also Professor Meyer and all participants. As part of Satya Wacana Faith Commitment and patron of Indonesian both online and offline seminar, we will begin this seminar with prayer. Professor Meyer, Professor Rupidara, and all participants, let us pray according to Christian faith. Let us pray. Lord, the creator of our universe, we're thankful for all blessings and grateful for your presence in our personal and academic life. Today, through this technology, we are able to gather in a virtual sphere, learning from Professor Meyer and Professor Rupidara on how we deal with this pandemic, especially in our higher education systems. Help all of us to learn from our speakers today and help us to anticipate the change and plan the change in our institution. Help us to think, help us to learn from Professor Meyer and Professor Rupidara. Give them blessing and the Holy Spirit so we all can enjoy the seminar and learn and then conduct our institutional change in our institution. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, we begin this online seminar. Amen.
Thank you, Pak Ishak.
Welcome.
Let me again greet you. Good evening for Professor Meyer in Massachusetts, in California, and good morning. And it's almost afternoon in Eastern Indonesia time, in Papua or in Molucca. I'm happy to have you all here in this seminar that we will talk on the topic, the effects of COVID-19 in higher education, which will be analyzed from the point of view of institutional theory, especially from organizational institutional perspective. For me, and I hope this applies for you all, that this is a rare event. Why? It is not just because we are discussing about COVID-19, a very hot topic today, and we will talk about its effect and to see it particularly in the context of higher education, and also we will talk this topic from the institutional perspective, but it's because of this seminar here to gather and discuss this from different places, and especially to have W. Meyer, our speaker today, who is sitting from his house in Palo Alto in California, USA. There is about 12 hours distance between Western Indonesia time to Pacific time in Palo Alto, 11 and 10 hours distance with Indonesia, Central and Eastern Indonesia time. So you have heard that I greeted John a good evening, while to you all other good morning. To make a preliminary position of this seminar, I believe that we all know that it is almost 6 months that we have had and confronting the COVID-19 pandemic. We all know that it started in Wuhan in China, late 2019. It had started to spread to other countries in January, especially after Chinese New Year in the middle of January. Although it severely hit our globalizing world sometimes in March, and it keeps continuing hitting us until today. Although we were warned about the uncertainty of when this pandemic will end, there was a hope that it could declining in May or June. But data show that countries experiencing COVID-19 earlier, yes, they have now shown a declining trend of the spreading, but in other countries, such as in South America today, a few countries in Africa, and a few countries in South Asia, we are seeing an increasing trend. So we will discuss this situation in this seminar, and I have put a series of program that you can see now in the screen. That we will have first prologue from myself as moderator, and then presentation of main points from Professor John Meyer, and then we will have questions and answers sessions before we close this seminar. So as we see the trends of the data showing all across the world, we have now mixed feelings about the COVID-19, whether it will end very soon or we will have to stay with it for some time. But we will especially see or analyze how it affects our work today, especially in higher education context. From my point of view, the virus has hit us, and it is difficult to conclude that this force has done something destructive or disruptive, or it has dismantled many our institutional work arrangements. I take for an example in higher education system that we have seen since March, early or in the middle of March, schools and campuses were closed from physical entrance, and therefore there is almost no single educational routine has taken place at school and campuses as we usually do before. Universities are also facing financial distress or difficulties. Changes and adaptations in our practice have been taking place. Although in some countries or in educational organizations, we've seen attempts to get back to normalities as we did prior to the pandemic, many others have decided to keep working online, and it is a way to stay away from the virus. In other contexts, such as in churches and religious lives, we also experienced the same destroying effect of COVID-19. Religious practices, for example, are we can say this has been a very old institution with very long traditions, and it has also been disturbed by the pandemic. We can also see in other contexts, such as in political order, that are also seriously challenged. Although we have one single enemy today, but this pandemic has stimulated increasing distrust to governments or to other trustworthy political players or systems. In higher education especially, or in the world of knowledge sector, science and its scientific and technological world may now be the single place where many rational human beings raise their hope to find answers on how could we stop this pandemic from destroying existing civilizations. Although it is fair to say that all faith systems are still be confronting places for many people, comforting places for many people to still put their hopes for divine solutions considering the broken down of human arranged world. Despite the many phases of the effects of this pandemic that we might construct and propose, one fast and single description that we could make is that the SARS-CoV-2 may have been the most powerful agent today that have shaken the foundations of, although it may be temporarily, our institutionalized world orders. That may be a fair point to start this talk today. But to walk into our talk this morning or this evening for Professor Meyer, I would like to raise preliminary groups of questions to stimulate the talk. First, how could we better make sense of this unexpected global disruptive event of COVID-19 pandemic, especially from an institutional thinking? Can we see the new coronavirus as a powerful agent or actor that has destroyed many world institutions? That's the first group of questions that I hope Professor Meyer will try to tackle when he presents his ideas. Second group of questions, in relation to the first group, although COVID-19 is a new disease that was probably unexpected and therefore unanticipated by many, but it has come and has created difficulties upon us. But now let's consider that we had also in the past Spain influenza, Ebola, SARS, H1N1, and MERS. We were really, my question is, were we really unaware or blinded of its coming? And can we say that we were institutionally unequipped to confront it, despite the fact that our science has been so well developing globally? How could we read this lack of preparedness in our response to COVID-19? Can we say in some way that we already lost in our war against it, at least up to this moment? The third group of questions, following those first and second questions, as far as we take into account all of our emergency responses, all our adaptations that we have taken today, such as, for example, massive online delivery of teaching and learning, how should we view this form of responses from institutional perspective? Let me take the example of online education. It is certainly not a novel response from higher education. It's been around for some time, but having it now conducted on a massive scale today, it is something unprecedented. And as we are not certain yet when will this pandemic be over, are all these responses we have today merely temporary forms of arrangement in time of emergency, or can we see, or can we expect that they will last longer and become permanent or institutionalized, become institutionalized practices? That's the third group of questions. The fourth group of questions, if we consider that this time, the pandemic time, as a time for retreat and reflection, what are the major institutional problems or handicaps that should we count as things or revealed in an expectation of future world orders that is better than we have had today? So that we could be more equipped, more ready for crisis or problems as big as COVID-19, showing our fragile responses as we had responded today. The seminar, friends and colleagues, focuses on the institutional effects of the COVID-19 pandemic in the particular context of higher education, where despite that we having been we have seen devastating effects of, for example, the closures of schools and campuses, there have also been creative responses, such as the seminar we conduct this morning. We, however, need to make an assessment of how this situation and the responses after the pandemic, how their durability in the post-pandemic world. In order to critically assess the effects of COVID-19 pandemic in higher education through the lens of institutional theory, our center, the Center for Institutional Analysis at UKSW, has invited Professor John Wilfred Meyer, founding father of the new institutional perspective in organizational analysis. John is an Emeritus Professor of Sociology and by courtesy of education at Stanford University. I guess it is in 2001, John, you retired from the formal duties in academia. Professor Meyer was a graduate of Goshen College in Indiana for his bachelor degree in psychology. He is also a graduate of University of Colorado for his MA in sociology, and from Columbia University for his Ph.D. Just to mention, Goshen College is a Christian liberal arts college. John will share his view on the topic as an organizational institutionalist. So let me now invite Professor John Meyer to present his main points on how institutionalism view this rare event of COVID-19 pandemic. So John, time is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me okay. It's a long distance. Thank you all for your interest in attending to my suggestions and my ideas. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. It has been a very long time since I was in Indonesia, but here I can be virtually present now. I'll talk in response to Professor Rupidara's points. I have three main topics to discuss: the short-run impact of COVID-19 on higher education, then a more medium-range picture of some effects, and then a longer range, more distant picture. So 3 main topics. On the immediate and short-term effects, first of all, that's what everyone talks about because everyone confronts a situation in which there is enormous disruption around the world in higher education, in all the dimensions, financial problems, all sorts of organizational problems, and classroom problems. Classrooms don't exist in the same way anymore. So as Neil Rupidara said, it's a very disruptive enterprise. It affects all the dimensions in which higher education is organized. And in many institutions will have to close, probably. All of them have to change. And it's very disruptive. That has obvious negative effects, and everyone discusses it. Many of these are organizational. Some things you can't do without laboratories and so on in operation. And there's obvious constraints of that kind. There's an institutional side to that too. Much of education and its effects are carried by the rituals, the structuring of fields, professorships, student roles, classrooms, customs of all sorts. That we're very conscious of the negative effects of all that stuff, but a great deal of education is carried in that form. And when you break up the form, you break up the effects, at least on the traditional measures of learning and accomplishment and attainment. So that's a sort of institutional dimension. If you violate everyone's expectations, you create a lot of uncertainty and a lot of disorder. So both organizationally and in a institutional sense, there are negative effects. There are some positive effects. Trivially, in some contexts, periods of economic recession slightly increase educational enrollments and interest as young people stay in school if they can't find work. I guess that's a positive effect. Then there are other possible positive effects. A lot of people think that this disruption has some virtuous consequences. It disrupts a lot of older and inefficient structures of education and offers us opportunities. Professor Rupidara said agency. The virus is a kind of agent of change. And some of those changes can be positive, although the immediate effects are likely to be negative. Even if the disruption in the long run produces some positive changes. The most obvious ones of these, as Professor Rupidara mentioned, is the massive shift to online learning, which has been going on for a long time in some measure, and now is everywhere. I had at my age to learn to conduct my seminar with online learning and radically change teaching styles in as much as at my age I'm able to. And everybody has to learn. And I suppose people will get better at that over time. And as a pattern of instruction, the one effect I think that we should emphasize, that continues a long historical process of what I call student centrism, of increasing individual student choice patterns, opportunities, and of course that has costs, since if you allow students to make a lot of decisions about their life, they make a lot of bad ones. But in the long run, I think in world educational culture, that is generally treated as a positive outcome in the long run. If that students increase their opportunities for choice and decision and so on. Obviously that has negative consequences for immediate learning of required materials since they have more choices, but it increases involvement, commitment, a lot of other things. But that seems to me a likely consequence, that I don't think we will be able to go back to older styles, completely to older styles of instruction when all this is over. Well, that's point one, the institutional and organizational consequences of massive disruption. And I guess that's something that everyone is conscious of, especially in very, very reputable institutions like the London School of Economics. 68% of their enrollment are tuition-paying students from abroad. Well, student mobility will be lower, and it creates a financial crisis for this institution. The little college I come from, where I went, a small Mennonite school in Indiana, face very serious problems, financial. They have no endowment worth talking about, no, dependent on tuition. And then embarrassingly, in American colleges, many are residential in character, and the students pay for room and board, and the college depends on that. And now the students aren't there, and it's very difficult to ask them to pay for room and board if they're not there. So a college like my little Goshen College, huge problems of that type. Well, that's point one. Point two, now shifting to the medium range, the global pandemic calls dramatic attention to higher education in the sense of the sciences. Unlike older pandemics, this one is analyzed scientifically, diagnosis, prescription, analysis of all sorts, and it reinforces the authority of the world scientific community that it deals with such problems. I guess the authority is pretty dramatic and is increased. So the contrast here is with the failure of the world political and economic elites to deal with this issue. It's pretty conspicuous. The scientific community, for all its mistakes, and its knowledge is rooted in the university, stands out as a structure of world solidarity dealing with a global problem. And the environment, the virus is a problem we all have in common, and it is a global problem, and that is very visible. So a consequence is the immediate and short-term attention to the sciences, probably some investment and so on. And I guess that's a process that might lead to reimagining global concerns and global responsibility. If it's pretty obvious that the world needs to deal with that. And when Neil Rupidara speaks of reimagination, a lot of people are reimagining a world control system that deals better with likely future epidemics. Also, given global integration, it's almost certain there'll be many more waves of this sort of thing. And I guess that reimagination is very much activated in current discussions. The virus is something that in a way holds us all together as a common problem to be analyzed medically and scientifically. And that does produce some reimagination. However, thinking in the longer term, yes, the scientists are at the center of the stage now, but there's an awful lot of reactions, quite negative reactions. And I guess this now returns to Neil Rupidara's question about how come we were not aware and ready for this? Well, that's a deliberate process. The effect of 1918, a major pandemic, got disappeared from world attention. Well, that's a political and cultural process rooted in by which we take disorderly things that are not controlled politically and economically and suppress them. We forget them. And 1918 is just a great example, because in my own history, I read a lot of American history as a student, but I never learned very much about the 1918 event, even though it was an overwhelmingly important event. I guess that's sort of striking, so that I think the point that we're not aware or unaware is that there's a real cultural process of ignoring unexpected events from outside a system. In a rationalizing world, we like to attend to the things that we can understand and control, and we are inattentive to the things out that scheme. And that inattention is deliberate, it is political, and it is cultural, and it is a feature of the world system that we live in. And it would be rather different in a world system with a different cultural base, I think. So now this unthinking is my last point, the reaction about these reactions. This also is reinforced because we are in a world climate for the last 10 years or so that is increasingly anti-liberal, anti-rationalist, anti-scientific. There are waves of nationalist and religious, cultural reactions that help us to be unaware of the great global problems. So on the one side, yes, the virus is something we have in common and maybe we can resolve it. But on the other side, it is something that in most places is seen as foreign, as a negative result of globalization. Something in reaction to which we close our borders, distance ourselves from each other, blame the other countries. This is very reminiscent of the first part of the 20th century, in which efforts to create a World Health Organization, a real one, were blocked by many countries who insisting on their sovereignty and especially resisting being thought to be the source of any kind of plague or anything. So they engaged in simple denial. That was 100 years ago. Now we see the same thing. The Chinese say, well, maybe it came from America. Like that. Everybody figures out to blame somebody else and to retreat to a nationalist or provincial localist basis. So I guess that's going on. It's associated with a lot of other things in the world that show a kind of reaction to globalization. So on the positive side, yes, the virus calls us that we have something in common and that we have a knowledge system, a global knowledge system that is to deal with it. Yes. But on the other side, we have an awful lot of reactions, and this may in part reinforce some of those reactions. And there are many world movements against non-governmental organizations, against science, and against higher education. Higher education comes under increasing criticism as too cosmopolitan. In many parts of the world, in Turkey, Hungary, Poland, and the United States, of course. The President of the United States is a leader in reactive resistance to the knowledge system of higher education. And you have in other major countries similar processes in Russia, in China, Brazil, many places you have waves of reactive resistance. And I guess, it's interesting who they blame. And of course, important sectors of most societies blame the scientists. They say it's a fraudulent thing. There is no such thing as the coronavirus. And some important elites support that in the contemporary world. So I guess the coronavirus, yes, it can produce a positive response, but a lot of the responses are likely to be negative. Against globalization, against the sciences, in favor of local barriers of nationalism and communal solidarities of various types. And I guess that's a worldwide movement going on right now. So I have a book with David Frank, my colleague, The University as the core of a global knowledge society. But in writing that book, we're very conscious that there are a lot of resistances to the global knowledge society, to globalization, to widespread interdependence, with the COVID-19 as an example of the evils of long-run interdependence. Well, so we end our book with speculation about what happens as the university becomes more peripheral, and indeed in many places seen as a kind of center of evil foreign cosmopolitanism. So that's a negative prospect of institutional changes that I think you can find examples of, and is one thing to be concerned about. So I would like to leave it there. Those 3 points, the immediate organizational trouble, a tremendous assertion of scientific authority, and a lot of strange world resistance too, and localist interpretations of. It's very common in the United States for people, especially associated with the more conservative political movements, to imagine that this is all a fraud by the scientists who are attempting to expand their power and authority, and that we as primitive local people and local communities should resist. That's a common perspective also in the United Kingdom. It's weaker in the continent, strong in Mexico, dominant in Brazil. So yeah, there's a lot to worry about. Let me leave it there and open the thing up for Neil Rupidara's comments and the comments of other people.
Silakan.
There is a technical problem. I'm sorry for the small disruption we have. Yeah, I hope my voice is clear enough.
I can hear you.
What was I tried to, there is a feedback.
TV-nya sudah di... Mungkin TV-nya perlu dimatikan suaranya.
Okay. Yeah. Better.
Still echoing.
Turn the volume completely down from the TV, I think.
That's
Yeah, that's better.
okay. Again, apologies for the technical problem. I hope you can hear me better now.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. So I was trying to make a short summary of John's presentation of three ways that we can view this problem of pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic. John has invited us to see its short-term effects and then medium-range effects, and also how can we see it in a longer-term situation. And in the short term view of COVID-19 pandemic, we have seen enormous destructions. The COVID-19 has been very disruptive in all dimensions of our life in the world, especially in higher education systems. And we've seen so many institutional effects. Before the pandemic, we've seen, for example, the increasing use of online systems of delivering teaching and learning, and it has given the space for more student centered approach in our learning, and this has provided more opportunities and choices for students, and this situation, this condition, to some extent, can be something that has helped us in our response to the COVID-19 crisis. Although we can say that it is very disruptive, but we are also able to make an appropriate response to to the situation because of the ongoing practices that has been more student-centered in our way of delivering education. That's the short-term effects of the COVID-19. In the medium range effect, John said that there has been a dramatic increasing attention to call for science developments where it would give opportunities for authorities in scientific work, including us, academics and researchers, but this call for attention has been in some way not well supported because of the failure of political and economic players to pay the same attention to invest in scientific work. And in the longer range effects, or what we have to reimagine about our future in higher education, John sees that there has been awful or negative reactions, and this is not only related to the situation or our condition in higher education, but it's been part of the larger waves or world of political and cultural processes. We are not ready to responding to the COVID-19 because, for example, there has been a process of ignoring, to forget past events such as the 1918 Spain influenza. So there has been a problem in our collective memory that some events that should be very good to remind us, to make us well prepared, that are lost in our political and cultural processes. These are influenced also by some phenomenon of or waves of, for example, increasing nationalisms, religious orientations, and also cultural reactions. And this has been a negative result of the negative side of the increasing globalization that we are experiencing. So John has invited us to respond to his three proposals to analyze COVID-19 pandemic, and I would like to take us all to the question and answer sessions. And before I begin the question and answer sessions, we would have maybe 3 sessions of the question and answers. And I would like to invite any of you who would like to raise questions or comments. We may have only little space for direct communication with John Meyer, so you would be able to post your questions through the chat facility of the Zoom. Beside me, Joseph will. It's okay in Bahasa Indonesia. Pak Joseph will translate and will speak on your behalf to ask Professor Meyer your question or comment, and we will give opportunities for Professor Meyer to respond the questions or comments. But before we take the questions or comments from chat, let me invite you that who will pose your questions directly. So,
Me
if
first.
you would like to raise your hand, and if I can see that, then I will give you the opportunity. First, Pak Jefferson Cameo, and then Pak Ishak Latu, Ibu Sid Natalia, so John, you are now familiar with, I call them Pak dan Bu, Pak and Bu. Let me give the first chance to Dr. Jefferson Cameo to take this opportunity to pose questions or comments.
Okay, thank you.
Baik, Pak.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, our rector. Professor John, nice to meet you virtually. My question is, I've just written in the chat, if you would be glad to see on the chat, but the point is this. Since I am studying law, so I only understand law, my science. So from this perspective, from legal perspective, which is I call dignified justice perspective, that's the theory that we are developing now, Professor John. I think that from this jurisprudence, we should always be able to cope with COVID-19. This is my institutional analysis, and I use supremacy of law. This is our institutions, our legal institutions in our country, in our constitution. That's in this country, the law is supreme. So there's nothing above the law, including COVID-19. That's my first.
Sorry, I can't hear you.
Is it okay now?
Yes, now.
Okay. So in Satya Wacana, Professor John, apart from the one that I've already mentioned before,
Yeah.
we have already been committed to be faithful to the word, to the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
So from this perspective, I think there will be always not any problem to face or to overcome COVID-19. This is my point. I hope you can see this clearly. So I really appreciate your ideas from sociological point of view, from your perspective. But this is what I would like to offer two perspectives. One, from the dignified justice perspective, from our constitutional approach. Mm-hmm. And this is, I call, institutional approach. And the second, as a part of Satya Wacana, we have already been committed to hold fast to the Bible. Mm-hmm. So, would you please kindly give any comment to this? And thank you very much, Mr. Professor John. Thank you, Rector.
Right. Should I respond to this question or wait till I can respond here? I think a problem in the world is that many relationships and many diseases, COVID-19, lie beyond the national boundaries of national law and beyond the boundaries of particular religious ideas. That out in that bigger space of globalization, there is little agreement on what the law that applies, and a great deal of cheating, and there is little agreement on fundamental religious conceptions, and that is a problem of order and regulation. Science fills partly into it, but it is by no means complete, and it leaves a great many social conflicts and problems unresolved. That's my response to, I understand that within a given society, a legal order can manage with some legitimacy, but of course, when you get to the bigger world, there are many questions about the legitimacy of many accusations of hegemony and so on that raise questions. That is my best response to your very thoughtful comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Prof.
Okay.
That's very kind.
Good. Thank you.
Oke, Pak Ishak langsung.
Thank you.
Pak Isaklato, tolong perbaiki audio, ada trouble.
Okay, I'm going to start it over again. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much, Professor Meyer, for your point. Since you also mentioned about the short, medium, long-term pandemic, the COVID-19, and also your sharing ideas, critiques on globalizations and political structures. I was wondering, what are the effective supports of from supra political power, national political structure, and civil society initiative in the context of Indonesia, like my former professors, Jeff Camille mentioned about religion, that we are very much linked to religions, and religion play very much influence on institutional life, on personal life in Indonesia, including higher education. So, so what is actually the effective support of these three structure of suprastructure, globalization, global political power, a national political structure, and also civil society as another political political tools in supporting higher education in the midst of pandemic like this? So yeah, that's a simple question. Thank you.
I think the university, as it has evolved and spread around the world with incredible levels of enrollment everywhere, is a structure of a global civil society. It is, of course, linked to the nation states, but its fields of instruction and degrees are all interpretable everywhere, so that it is very easy for you to read the course listing and department listing of a university in a country you've never been to. It's almost all interpretable. When you read catalogs of universities anywhere, almost all is interpretable. Less often interpretable are the organizational features. Who is in charge of what? That's hard to figure. But when they list their departments and their courses of instruction, that is all global in character. And when you go to other countries, your degrees are more or less recognized. So it is a supranational stratification system with a great deal of cultural content. Resistance to globalization is often resistance to that cosmopolitan character of the university, and is often critical of the university itself as violating the national boundaries and subscribing, importantly, to a world culture. I think, and as that weakens with nationalist opposition and resistance and with negative economic effects, that cultural solidarity, which is, of course, most extreme with the sciences and fairly extreme with the social sciences, is undercut. So I guess the nationalist reactions to COVID-19 are indicative of that and involve an attempt to undercut the cosmopolitan authority of the university's knowledge system. I trust that responds to your comment.
Thank you, Prof. Meyer. Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Professor Meyer. Thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and I thought that this is a nice topic to discuss, and thank you for sharing your idea. My question is about how does the institution, in the institution perspective, or maybe a sociological perspective, propose or give point of view or maybe take responsibilities of the equality in the new education access or system for marginal community, in which maybe, for example, in the Indonesian context, they have a different access, they have a different resilience to involve in this new era. Maybe this is my question. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Part of the underlying structure of education as it spreads around the world are increasingly strong doctrines of equality on matters like educational access. So as a normative matter, there is expanded and expanding world agreement on equality, which is very strange because, as you know, in the factual area, there is great inequality. So we live in a world in which extreme norms of human equality are dominant, but extreme practices of inequality are also very common. The sociologists use the word decoupling to describe that. But over time, historically, in fact, there is a good deal of increase in equality, particularly in matters like gender, but also minority groups. And in many countries, there are increases in levels of actual equality in access, in attainment, and so on. But of course, inequality is extreme still. And some people see parts of the educational system and political system as reinforcing that. But the worldwide norms are quite strong. In the case of gender, of course, to everyone's surprise, female enrollments in higher education generally in the world now surpass male enrollments. So in that area, you get actual equality. But in sociology in the United States and in Europe, where it is highly developed, equality is the main issue. That's what everybody wants to study. Gender equality, ethnic, racial equality, to some extent class equality, intergroup equality. That is all the doctoral dissertations are about that. And it surprises everyone how strongly committed everyone is to the principle of equality. This produces some distortions in research, which is so normatively focused on equality that it asks some questions get distorted. And everyone thinks that research would be better if there was less normative commitment, except that if there was less normative equipment, there wouldn't be any research money. So that's my response, I guess I would say. I think COVID-19, by the way, calls again attention to the enormous international and intranational injustices and inequalities in the spread of this disease. And people who analyze that spread often call attention to and criticize the inequalities involved. Again, seeing enforcing norms of equality. Is that helpful? Does that respond to what you?
Yes. Thank you for your response, because I have a experience now. I'm studying in Paris. I'm staying in here, and I try to make a comparison between my experience with the education system in Indonesia. I saw how the way they deal with this COVID in this era. So it's kind of different and how the way they deal with this condition. So thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah. But still, everyone, even though there are differences, everyone at least symbolically agree. Big problem of inequality. They accept that. That's interesting to me, because when I first went into the field of sociology, that was much weaker. That wasn't a dominant issue. There were many other issues, but that we took for granted as students then, that of course there was a lot of inequality. And we didn't know that that was the big problem. Now, worldwide, it's the big problem.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you, John. Thank you for saying. Through the chat facility. So I would like to invite Josh to speak on behalf of the participants who have posted the questions.
Okay, thank you for this opportunity. There are two questions from Pak Iwan and Bu Anggreni. Hello, Professor Meyer. This is Joseph speaking on behalf of Pak Rector Rupidara to read some of the questions. There are two questions. The first one is the denial of COVID-19 and science in general a reflection of the failure of higher education institutions to quote unquote educate the masses in the past? I hope you can understand what is right here. Is the denial of COVID-19 and science in general a reflection of the failure of higher education institutions to educate the masses in the past? Yeah, maybe you can respond to that question first.
Yes, I certainly can.
Cannot hear?
Yes, I can hear. Yeah, it's fine. My response is I don't think that the response is directly a product of a particular failure of higher education. If you look at the countries with more expanded higher education, you don't see very much difference. The negative reactions occur there, and they occur where higher education is not so much expanded and is not so successful. So I don't see a very direct causal connection. And I am not sure what evidence one would put forward to test the question. But the best you could do is, if you look at countries where higher education is very weak, are the reactions stronger there? I don't think so. But after all, in the United States, you have a hugely expanded system of higher education, and you get lots of negative reactions, including from the President of the United States, who himself has a higher education. And maybe the world would be better if Mr. Trump's teachers had been better teachers. But I don't know. That's my response. Okay.
Second question, Pak Jos. Okay, second question. This is in Bahasa Indonesia, so let me try to translate this from Pak Satya in Universitas Dianapura in Bali. The impact of COVID-19, sorry, I have to disappear. The impact of COVID-19 to higher education outside of Java is really severe, especially for the sustainability of the campus or the other higher educational institutions, especially private institutions, because they are very much dependent on their savings. So there are some financial crisis and social crisis, especially in Bali. So what can the policymakers do to handle or to overcome this quote-unquote red alert situation? Because now in Bali especially, only 30% of the students could afford for their tuitions and fees. I hope I make myself clear.
You make yourself very clear, yes. But I don't, it is a hard question to answer. And I guess around the world, countries try different solutions. Sometimes in the rich countries, they provide funding, extra funding for students. In the United States, it's not clear what policy responses there will be, because the political parties differ greatly in how they want to fund things. The schools that suffer most, as you say, are the private schools that don't have very much money, don't have endowments, that are very dependent on tuition. And they they have a terrible trouble. Of course, I'm at Stanford University, which has a lot of money, and it can buy its way out of these problems. But 90% of private schools can't do that. So it might be that rates of closure of private schools will increase. Of course, in many European countries, there are really not real private schools very much. So there it becomes a problem for the political policymakers to figure out how to fund the public institutions. But I'm used to the American context where there are a lot of private schools and a lot of them have great trouble. And I don't see a resolution. And some of them close. They just close.
The third question from the participants is from Anggreni Rupidara. So, according to you, Professor Meyer, what social life will affect students or higher education in the next or post-pandemic world into the future? Do we all proceed to the 5.0 world, and what higher education will behave regarding to the many changing aspects in educational perspective? So it's about the way we proceed into the future with regard to technological development.
Yeah, it makes a big difference how long this pandemic goes on. The longer it goes on, the more consequences there are organizationally. People imagine technical solutions, often involving long distance instruction and learning, various learning technologies. That's a very common topic. I don't know how much that will solve any problems in the post-pandemic world. And I tend to be skeptical because in past years, technical solutions have been proposed that were going to change all of education everywhere, but did not do so. I'm old. I can remember when people thought television was going to change everything in education. And before, I can't remember, but my father can remember when radio was going to change everything in education. So there's a long history. And then in the 19th century, with the invention of the textbook, that was going to change education. You wouldn't need teachers anymore because you were going to have textbooks. So the faith, and at Stanford, I should say, the faith in technical solutions is very great. Stanford is always committed to the idea that social problems can be resolved by technical improvement. That's a part of Stanford's ideology. I'm skeptical about that, but I don't have particular evidence aside from the failure of past technical reforms to solve all problems. In the United States, there's a long history of relying on technical fantasies as solutions in education problems.
Thank you, John. And the fourth question from participants who
posted the question through chat. Is from Mr. Bhakti Nendra. Let me read that. Thinking back to a time when I did my first master degree at London School of Economics, I could confirm that there were a couple of problems hinted at by Professor John Meyer. First, the cost of education, or particularly higher education, which have increased dramatically since Margaret Thatcher's government due to drastic reduction of subsidies and dependence of overseas students. Number of students with increasing fees became thus the main features of many British, but I guess it's worldwide phenomenon, British universities, along with increasing or extra fundraising activities. Inequality became an issue there. Now it is also a problem in Indonesia with the so-called something missing in the question, campur autonomy or campus, yeah, university autonomy. Can a continuing coronavirus 19 usher in a change into the system of university education, which will be more egalitarian and equal due to the employment of online impartations of knowledge using the latest technology, supported also by the government to all universities?
Yeah, I think that the question certainly describes the world very well. The reliance on tuition greatly increased with neoliberalism, especially in the United Kingdom, but also in the United States. The solution in the United Kingdom of relying on students from other countries to pay very high tuition, that is also used in the United States, but much less. So that crisis, that particular crisis hits the London School of Economics says that 68% of its students are coming from other countries and paying a lot of tuition. Wow, that's a big number. Stanford, it's much smaller. But what everyone who looks at the situation thinks that in immediate terms, the COVID crisis will increase inequality, not decrease it in the short term. Whether the spread of online instruction increases or decreases to complete the programs and so on. So it depends a lot on how that online instruction is organized. But as it stands now, no one who thinks about the situation sees an increase in equality as coming through technical solutions on a short-term basis in the near future. There is great faith that it will happen in the long run. And all kinds of ideologies that are strange about that if we have better DNA analysis of each individual, we can create more individualized instruction for him and solve the problems, for example, of handicapped students. A lot of belief. I'd be very skeptical about that, but the faith is very strong. All the technical advocates of technical solutions, they can convince you that they have extreme solutions that will solve everything. and they compete with each other to get money to pursue their solution. So I myself have no, I would tend to be very skeptical.
Thank you, Professor Meyer.
Let me then invite participants who would like to post their questions directly after we read a number of questions that were posted in the chat. Is there any participants that will post the questions?
I think there is one here from participant Santo Formen. Let me read and try to make sense of this. Everyone seems to become expert in the matter of COVID-19 pandemic, and they make noises, especially in social media. Can we interpret the phenomenon of COVID-19 now as a multidisciplinary phenomenon, and thus it becomes the end of expertise or disciplinary expertise, I guess? I don't know. I remember the death of an author from a post-structuralist view, but I'm not sure if that is the question. But let me read again. Could we interpret COVID-19 as a multidisciplinary phenomenon, thus becoming the end of expertise?
Yes. Many people feel entitled in the modern system to have opinions on such questions. I don't know if you call it multidisciplinary or non-disciplinary, but the range of participants who feel that they are empowered actors who speak in public on such questions, it's amazing. And of course, it's extreme in America with the history of individualism and individual empowerment in America, and it's extreme in California, which is the extreme of American. But in my life, I have to deal with large numbers of people who have opinions and no knowledge. And this is a very common characteristic of California society. So yeah, there are a lot of experts around, and they communicate on social media. They communicate everywhere. They're loosely rooted in the education system, but only loosely. And I wouldn't call it multidisciplinary. I would say it transcends disciplinary boundaries and becomes a property of all sorts of individual actors that they can opine, including, of course, the President of the United States, who has various theories about the COVID-19 and who speaks them from time to time. Some of them are dangerous. But it's a great question. But the world is filled with, remember, 30% of a cohort or 35% of a cohort of young people in the world get some higher education. It isn't very good, but they acquire the right to speak on a wider range of issues than a peasant would have spoken in a previous world. They make a lot of noise. It's a feature of the world.
Daily life. Gaps between the technical development and the institutionalized practices, and therefore there is no or at least there is a delayed effect from the current development and probably future development of technology to daily life in higher higher education. From our discussions, my questions would be, John, if we see the problem of our responses that we have discussed or you have proposed from the beginning, haven't we learned or studied enough? Therefore, not doing enough in accumulating our knowledge. I guess the answer would be no. We've done much. We've done many things. We have enough accumulated knowledge. But then the problem would be the second question there is, haven't we distributed or socialized those accumulated knowledge that we have been developed until today? So the gaps between the technical world and our institutionalized life or practices still there, and probably it's a gap. It's a big gap. So the question is for the future, as we try to reimagine how higher education will go into the future, and how higher education affects the social life of many of the public. The question is how science has to be communicated to the public, because we've seen also the influences from other domains of institutions, such as political powers, such as economic powers, and other cultural actors that play their role in influencing the way we think, the way we act as community or as worldwide communities. So could you respond to those critical questions about the accumulation of knowledge, the distribution of knowledge, or how we as higher education institutions have to communicate the science into the public? Thank you, John.
Yeah, this is not a matter on which it's easy to respond, since the judgments are relative. Clearly in the world, you've had a massive increase in the education of masses, of people, ordinary people. And then you also have an especially high expansion of higher education with its effects, and then an expanded knowledge system. I don't know how you decide how to allocate, how you want to distribute the knowledge system or understanding of it. There are political processes by which people, educated people, can form very strange judgments. And I'm not sure I have anything very useful to contribute about that, although I understand the problem. It's an ancient problem, often discussed. The cultural gap between, or in the 75 years ago, they talked about cultural lag, that the understanding of ordinary people in society is far removed from the knowledge and the system of regulation that governs it. And then you have very specific versions of that, by which we talk about the democratic deficit in Europe between the elite decision-making processes and the ordinary people who don't have power. It goes on all the time, and it is increased in the neoliberal period by the rise of global institutions, including science, very far removed from the democratic process of expressing and articulating interests. And that certainly produces in the world a lot of reaction. They do not want to be regulated by the people at Davos. I guess that's the best answer I could make, but how you, education.
There is another question from the chat from Ricky. Looking at the news about US conditions the past few weeks, it looks like more attention is given to the racism issue. So I want to ask, do you think higher education institutions and organizations see this pandemic as a crucial issue for higher education in the US? If yes, how do they respond to this pandemic institutionally? Are they preparing the post-pandemic work? And if yes, what are they are preparing for the post-pandemic work?
I think there is an overwhelming awareness that racism is a continuing problem in the country, and that things have to be done about it. Most of those proposals are not primarily about education, but about economic opportunity and especially police regulation and so on. But the institutions of higher education also are very conscious of the racial inequalities that they confront, and there's a wave of policies to deal with that. How well it does deal with that, I don't know. But they certainly circulate policy discussions, special arrangements for expressing opposition to racism and support for the access by minorities to educational and other opportunities. That's a dominant theme right now. Also in Europe, I believe, something that everyone is aware of, partly because of what happened in America. I don't know that the COVID crisis makes for more consciousness of the racial issue. It certainly makes some consciousness, because there are clear inequalities racially in COVID experience. But I think they're separate but related problems, and more and the universities certainly try to deal with them, and the students demand to deal with them. Everyone demands to deal with them. Who knows how well they will do in the future.
One last question from Linda Rupidara, talking about institutional changes. Somehow they link to the issue of internal capabilities of institutional actors, organizations, but as well as the political will of the leaders. The question is, should the institutional change driven by individual organization itself or actors, or is it necessary to create a common platform for some institutions, some organizations that have the same interest to discuss and share about this and possibly contribute to the standard qualities expected from the institutional change?
Well, I think that your question is a question in part about political structure. There certainly have been attempts to consolidate and bring together different institutional forces to produce social change and to produce political change. That's certainly endemic in this period. It is not entirely clear how successful that will be. You have lots of resistance to national collective action of a positive kind. I mean, you have dramatic instances of national withdrawal where the elites are fragmented and do not support large-scale social change. You have the dramatic example of Brexit in the United Kingdom. You have astonishing behavior of the American government, again, representing a coalition of reactive forces. The organizations trying to make social change do cooperate with each other and do coalesce in political movements. We'll see how successful that is. But everyone would agree that in most developed countries, the COVID-19 experience is one of dramatic failure. I think that is a very widespread sense. And you would certainly, everyone in the United States would certainly say that. The American government has pretty dramatically failed, and they would not blame the institutions of higher education for that. They would blame the political process.
Thank you, John.
Hmm?
Guess we would be reaching the end of this seminar. So we have heard from John a way for us to understand the COVID-19 and its effects, especially in higher educations. We have 3 periods of time to analyze the effects of COVID-19 to higher education. In short term, we've seen enormous destructions. In the middle or medium range, there has been a dramatic attention to call for science and its development, and therefore it provides opportunities for authorities in scientific world to do more and more studies, accumulating knowledge, and therefore it needs higher or bigger investment. But we have also seen failures of support from political and economic players to help these scientific authorities to do their job, and this is and will be related to the way we build a new reimagined future of our globalized world. We've seen from this pandemic a failure of or a negative result of the globalization, and it would in some way affect the process of our attention to more regional or local orientations in higher education, for example. But we hope that all the cultural processes that has been going on until today, and we hope into the future, it will create a better future of the globalization itself and its effects. Although we've learned a lot, I think, from the pandemic crisis. You have mentioned before, John, that there has been a worldwide movement, including in our global knowledge society. There has been a greater interdependence of researchers, of academics across the world, and we hope if the current COVID-19 case show us that we need to do more, we hope that this movement is getting bigger and bigger, not only in terms of knowledge accumulation, but also to be communicated and influencing our societies. So at least the cultural influence from the higher education sector, from the knowledge sector, can be become more influential into the future. Although we understand from the current condition of COVID-19, the influences from the political and economic sphere has also been great, and it also distorted the realities, the influence from the higher education sector. So we need to do more and more. I guess this discussion has stimulated more critical questions rather than we answered already the questions we had before. So it is now a call for us all to be more committed in terms of resource accumulations to do science more and more. So thank you, John, for your participations, your thoughts that have stimulated us to study more and to do more in terms of our contributions to the national reality of each nations and also our globalized world. I would like also to thank all participants, those who participated actively by posting questions, but also those who, according to our situations, more inactive in these discussions. Before I close, I would like to invite John again to give a final statement to close this webinar, and then we will have a closing prayer and photo sessions. So in the photo sessions, I hope everyone will turn their video on, so we can take the pictures of you during the photo session. So John, your time to say final words.
Well, first of all, thank you for stimulating discussion and questions. And I have much to think about just in responding to the issues that you raise. Obviously, I think you feel that higher education is central to solving major problems in the world, including a world pandemic, and I think that is right. But it's also true that higher education as a global institution is under some attack precisely for being a global institution, and that many of the changes that seem possible don't involve the use of higher education to organize knowledge, research, and teaching around important social problems. I have been at work in my life analyzing that situation rather than being a protagonist. I've devoted an enormous amount of time to understanding why are there universities everywhere in the world, and why is 35% of young people going to them. How did that happen over the last 70 years? What does it mean that these institutions have this elite standing and are therefore subject to a lot of criticism for precisely having that elite standing? And then we're trying to think, where does that lead a world? that seems very disorganized and that has dramatically failed to deal with a pandemic, but also with some other important global issues. Everyone would pick out inequality as a dramatic one, but we didn't discuss it here, but the issues of sustainability, the issues of global warming, climate change, and I think we're all struck by the ineffectiveness of the wider global system to deal with problems. But it's not that I have positive ideas of resolving all this. I don't have a package of solutions in my pocket. Thank you for your interest.
Thank you, John, for your final words. They raise some more critical questions for us all. Yeah, we have a hope that higher education will play a greater role and influence in the society. But yeah, we are aware of the critical views about the higher education institution itself. So thank you very much, John, and all the participants. Let me invite Pak Iwan Setiawan to take us into the closing prayer, and then we will have our photo sessions. Pak Iwan, your time, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Neil. Ladies and gentlemen, before we close our seminar this morning, we would like to pray to thank God for all the blessings that we have received. I'm going to lead the prayer in the Christian faith. Let us pray. Thank you, God Almighty, for your blessings that you have given us. In particular, we thank you for the opportunity today to learn and discuss the effects of COVID-19 to our institutions and how to deal with these problems. We are grateful for what Professor Meyer has shared today so that we can become much more aware of the impact of the pandemic to our world. We hope that we will be able to use everything we have learned today to help our institutions survive and even thrive in these difficult times. We will now end the seminar and return to our daily activities. We pray for your continuing blessing for everything we do in our respective institutions. Please let us be a shining candle in our small corner of the world. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Back to you, Pak Rector.
Thank you, Pak Iwan. Allow me to ask you to turn on your video so your face will be showing up, and we will be taking photos of everyone participating in the seminar. Put your best smiles.
Okay.
The second screen. We have 5 screens here. Okay, the third one. And the fourth. And the last one.